Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're looking at a really cool piece of actual new firearms technology. This is the Biofire smart gun, and the first thing that I need to talk about with regards to this is that New Jersey law. So you may be aware that for a while, New Jersey actually had a law on the books that as soon as a smart gun, a gun that would only fire for an authorized user, as soon as something like that was deemed commercially viable, it would start a countdown clock, and after a couple of years in New Jersey, it would only be legal to sell those pistols. Well, that law is no longer actually on the books. I'll give you a moment right here. You can pause the video and go check and confirm, because that's the same thing I did when I first heard about this. All right, so law's off the books, which means that this isn't actually causing problems by its very existence, which is a good initial bar to clear. Now, this project began 6 or 8 years ago as originally a science fair project, the idea being to develop a biometric ID system where you could actually have a firearm that would only fire for an authorized user. Now, a bunch of people have tried this out. The most recognized one is the Armatix out of Germany, which I did a couple of videos on. The Armatix was a terrible pistol, and it was a terrible biometric, well, it wasn't a biometric system, it was a watch that you had to wear that synced up with the gun. It was a very bad solution. Frankly, most of the other solutions out there have been very bad solutions from technological and firearms perspectives. What made me interested in this, because I was initially pretty skeptical about this one as well, until I had a chance to talk to Biofire a couple times, and the biggest single thing that they did was explain that it's not supposed to be a universal firearm. It's not a gun to do everything. And that's perhaps the biggest problem with smart guns that have been developed, is there's a lot of developers have this idea that the smart gun will replace all other firearms, and this is the only thing that you will ever need to have. And Biofire is the opposite. For them, this is a pistol that is aimed at a very specific target market and a very specific purpose, and one where the biometric identification smart gun technology really makes a lot of sense. So once they explained that, I got a lot more interested in it. Now, that specific market is essentially the home defense nightstand bedside table gun for someone who has other people that might be in their house, in particular, parents with small children, or potentially also people who have roommates. The idea of, I'd like to have a gun for home defense, readily accessible, but I'm worried that my kid's going to grab it and they'll accidentally shoot themselves or someone, or I'm worried that my roommate's going to come into my room and mess with my gun or steal it. And there are other use cases as well, the idea that something like this, if it's stolen, can't be used for ill by someone else, but the main focus is bedside gun that no one else can mess with. And what that lets you do is avoid the conundrum of, how do I keep a self-defense gun readily available but also safe? Like, do I get one of those, there are a variety of quick access safes, which are, well, if you go watch some of the lock-picking style of channels, you'll see that most of those safes are totally worthless from a theft perspective. They may or may not be very good for actual rapid access. Do you have a trigger lock? Well, trigger lock, how easy is it to get a trigger lock off the gun when it's the middle of the night and you're awoken by smashed glass and are under immediate stress? Like, the idea that you could have a gun where you pick it up and it authenticates to you, and that's all you have to do, you don't have to keep it in a special safe or anything, that I think is a really interesting concept, and it's a very appealing idea to a pretty significant market segment. So that's what Biofire set out to actually create. Now, there are two elements to this pistol. There's the electronic element and there's the mechanical element. On the electronic side, the problem, the engineering challenge is, how do we create a pistol or a system that will immediately and reliably authenticate to an authorized user and not authenticate to an unauthorized user? And in order for this to work, it has to do that 100% of the time, and it has to do it immediately. If you pick this thing up and you have to wait around for it to authenticate, or you pick it up and 5% of the time it just doesn't quite work and you have to try again, that is pretty much the death knell for a system like this. People are just not going to accept it. The idea, the whole purpose is life and death self-defense use. So it has to work immediately. And in order to do that, what Biofire concluded is that they actually have to have two separate biometric systems that operate, that are redundant, where either one can authenticate the gun. And the one system they use is a fingerprint scanner, which you can see right here on the side of the grip. There are, by the way, left-hand and right-hand models. You have to get a finger on the fingerprint scanner for the fingerprint scanner to work, so left versus right does matter there. And then the secondary system is a facial recognition camera. So on the back of the gun here, there is a little tiny camera. And when you first get this thing, you program it essentially with your fingerprint and your Face ID. This is a process very similar to setting up a modern smartphone with a fingerprint reader and or facial ID camera. And what's cool about this system is if you reach out and grab the gun and get a finger on it, by the time that you have the thing up anywhere close to a firing position, the fingerprint scanner has had enough time to authenticate. Now, what if you have any number of problems, like your hands are covered in chicken grease or something, and the fingerprint scanner doesn't work? Well, that's when the facial ID recognition, facial ID camera kicks in instead. If you have the gun in a position where the back end is pointing towards you, the camera is always watching you and will recognize your face, and it will authenticate. That takes slightly longer, but the cool thing is that you only need one of the two, and between them, that's where you can get the essentially 100% reliability of a system that will authenticate under virtually any circumstances. Now, the other really cool element of the system here, and to me this is, I think, even more technologically challenging and interesting than just recognizing a user and authenticating, is the pistol has a series of systems built in to understand when it has been put down or grabbed by someone else versus when you're holding on to it. So if I pick up the gun and it authenticates to me, I can move my finger off the fingerprint sensor, I can point it in some direction where the camera is no longer facing me, and the gun will remain authenticated and active as long as I'm actually holding it. And they do that through, there are a number of accelerometers inside the gun that can pay attention to how it's being moved. And then technologically, or well, more physically, there are a pair of laser, they call them time-of-flight lasers, in the front and the back strap that are basically always aware of whether the gun's being held. So I've been playing with it a bit, and it's pretty darn good. Like if I take this and I switch it to my other hand, it deauthenticates until, of course, it sees me again, or I put my finger back on the fingerprint sensor, which pretty well replicates, like if you're struggling over the gun and someone takes it from you, it will deauthenticate and it will no longer function. But if let's say I'm messing around with the gun and I go and I want to reload it, maybe I have a malfunction I need to clear, I want to put the gun, somewhere out of sight, it remains authenticated even if my grip is changing. And that's a really cool system that, to be honest, hadn't really even occurred to me as an important element to a system like this. Now, when it comes to the actual firearm itself, and by the way, I apologize, I can't do a full teardown of this. This is just being released to the public sort of as a teaser now. They're going to be on the market in a couple of months, and at that point, you can bet I'm going to get my hands on one of these and we'll really dig into it. But one of my initial questions to Biofire was like, well, you're using an existing firearms platform, right? You're not trying to develop all of this electronic material and also design your own pistol from the ground up. And it turns out, no, they actually are designing their own pistol from the ground up. And that was made necessary because of the electronic elements of the gun. So the best example here is this can't be a classic tilting barrel system because everything you see in here, this isn't just for looks, this is because this is packed with like a dozen plus circuit boards. There's a big battery in here, there's sensors, there's wiring, there's a lot of stuff inside the shell of this pistol, and there's not extra space for a tilting barrel to tilt into. So they came up with their own inline linear recoil system. Similarly, their magazine, which I don't have here, but their magazine is a proprietary magazine. Well, why not just use an existing magazine? And the answer is because the magazine release location has to be rather higher than is typically used because there's a fingerprint sensor in the grip, there are electronic elements in the grip, and there isn't a good existing magazine that will fit the specification, so they had to come up with their own. Now, it's largely based on existing, well-proven magazines, but it does have to be a proprietary magazine. So Biofire has taken on a really pretty ambitious challenge in developing both the electrical, the electronic side, the computer side. Like, this thing has as much computing power in it as an early smartphone because it's doing all this facial recognition processing, and also developing the mechanical aspect of essentially a standalone, unique firearm from the ground up as well. So it helps that they've got 5 years of development into this, and I have come away from this opportunity to try it out really pretty excited and impressed by the system. So before we go any farther, why don't we go ahead and take one of these out to the range. They have a little range facility where we can do some actual shooting with it, and you can see what the thing looks like, and we'll go through the initial authentication process of, like, how do you actually get the gun to let you shoot it? Okay, let's go ahead and actually set up a pistol. So I have a cradle here. This has a power supply, and it's going to connect to the gun's basically computer console here. Snap that on, and then the pistol itself has a battery here, but then it has a USB interface port right in there, and that connects to that guy. So when I put that in the cradle, this is like the standard sort of storage configuration for the gun. It's constantly charging. The screen here is going to tell me what's going on with the gun, and we will go ahead and get me set up as this gun's owner. So this is how this would be set up right out of the box, brand new. So we're going to get started. I'm going to call me Ian. There we go. This, by the way, is not connected to the internet. So, and also worth pointing out that the biometric data that it's going to get from me here is all stored in the gun itself. It's not stored on the tablet, and it is actually stored fully encrypted. So there's no way that anyone's like sneaking your fingerprints out of the gun. All right, yeah. Biometric data is stored hashed. No images are stored. Data never leaves the smart gun. We'll start with a fingerprint. And this is very much like a cell phone. So I've got a fingerprint sensor right there, and I'm going to put my hand on it, and we're going to do this a couple times, just like you would with a cell phone. There we go. A couple different positions of the finger have gotten me a finalized fingerprint. Next, we're going to do face recognition. This one's a little awkward with the camera here, but I'm going to point my face at it. There we go. It has recognized my face. I am now enrolled as the owner of this gun, and now it's going to tell me all about it. I have no issues. If one of the interesting things here is if the gun has any problems, which can include potentially things like mechanical issues. If I don't clean it for 5,000 rounds and the slide starts moving slowly, that's the sort of thing that can be recognized and come up. Software is up to date. We'll go ahead and authenticate to continue. There we go. I've got some settings that I can change. So for example, I can have it automatically turn on the laser when I authenticate or not. I'm going to leave that off. Current users, just me. If I wanted to add another user, I can add another person. I can make them a permanent user. I can make them a temporary user. And the last step of this, like we'll put in their name and then it goes through the same process it just did. And then at the very end, I have to authenticate the gun again to confirm the new user, which means if you happen to leave this thing in this state, and it will shut off after a relatively short time, but if like your kid sneaks in and manages to get into this and adds themselves as a user, unless they get you to come in and authenticate it at the end of the process, it won't actually add them. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, now, cancel enrolling a new user. Now I have a gun that works. So when I pick this up, it's going to come out of sleep mode. This and this are both laser sensors that can tell when something's gripping the gun. So with this white light here, it is searching for me, and it can't find me because it's not looking at me and I'm not touching the fingerprint sensor. when I do touch the fingerprint sensor, boom, it authenticates to green. See the front sight's green as well, and now the gun is live and will work. And I can take my finger off the sensor, it stays green, I can mess around with it, I can cycle it, I can mess with the magazine release here, changing my grip around, stays green. Anyway, well, let's go ahead and take this out on the range now. Alrighty, so break this out. Magazine capacity is 15. We're working with 10 today. The pistols are still prototypes. As soon as I cover the lasers here, it turns white, which means it's actively looking for me. So it's only when this turns white does the camera start actively looking for me. And by the way, it is a near IR camera, and it has a little IR flash strobe in there, so the camera will work in the dark, which is relevant for home defense. I really do like that. You know, it's one thing to fiddle around with it and try and, you know, disprove the thing, but when I actually pick up the gun, like I'm going to shoot it, by the time it comes up, that sight's just green. It is still a prototype, but green again. Now, of course, it's still green for me. If I have some random rogue Biofire employee come up here and try to take the gun from me, and he grabs it, up. No shooty. Now you're trying to hold that right-handed.
Yeah.
But even if you use the fingerprint sensor, psych, you're not enrolled in the gun. You don't get to shoot it. But I do get to shoot it. Back to green for me. This is the challenge of developing your whole new firearms platform and biotech sensor platform at the same time. Whoop. There we go. Didn't cycle the trigger. So that's why this is still pre-production. They're going to get these bugs worked out in the next couple of months, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. One of the other interesting things about smart guns is there are a whole bunch of different people have different standards for what the thing needs to do. So for the target market for this pistol, which is a person who has kids who wants to have a gun readily available but also safe, what it needs to do is basically the authentication system. But there are a bunch of people who are going to look at this and go, aha, I bet it won't work if. Or I bet I can break it somehow. Like, how can I make this work for me if I'm not the authenticated user? And Biofire has put a whole bunch of time and thought into those issues as well. So from a mechanical standpoint, by building a gun from the ground up, instead of modifying an existing platform, they have a much more sophisticated, basically firing system. So typically with a smart gun, something like the Armatics, what you have is a traditional firearm that has some sort of interlock in it. And an interlock, certainly the one in the Armatics, is usually pretty easy to get rid of. You pull out the locking part, poof, toss that, and now the gun just works like a regular gun and you can ignore all the electronic systems. In this, there is actually no physical link between the sear and the trigger. That whole process, like, there isn't a linkage bar that you can just override and use. Instead, it is an electrical sensor system that releases solenoids that then drop the sear. So there isn't a mechanical override that you can do. When it comes to the electronic aspects, they've put a lot, like I said, they put a lot of thought into that. I can't show you it on this pistol because this is still like an early teaser release, but while I was here at Biofire, we pulled one of these down all the way to its component wires and screws and circuit boards. And the assembly is set up such that, for example, you can't just do a field strip, take the pressure-bearing parts off the top, and mate them to a new unregulated lower assembly. The gun won't actually work, and that's based on their electronic or computerized electrical settings that prevent that from working. That is not my forte. That's something for the electrical wizards to delve into and to try and break. From what they've told me, it seems like they've done a pretty good job of it, but you can bet that as soon as these are available out on the commercial market in a couple months, all the guys from DEF CON are going to be slavering to get their hands on one of these and break it. And those guys will tell you all about the electrical security elements of the gun. So I'll leave that to them. My biggest single takeaway from this is that, frankly, it's a little bit big of a gun, which isn't a big deal for a nightstand. Like, this isn't designed to be this isn't intended to be carried. You certainly could, but that's not the design concept intent. That's not what they're trying to market it for. If you want a carry gun, buy a regular gun to carry. This is something that's specifically so that you can leave it out of your control, loaded, and still safe. Anyway, the biggest takeaway I came away from this with was that it shoots like a gun. There's no discernible delay. They've built in a system where, despite the fact that there's no actual trigger linkage, it feels like a firearm trigger, and that's very deliberate. It feels like shooting a kind of large 9mm pistol. The recoil is pleasant. The weight of the battery and all of the electrical components do a bit to help tame the recoil of the thing. If it weren't for the fact that it's got sensors and screens and lights on it, you wouldn't know that this isn't just a regular mechanical pistol. And I think that's a sign that they've done their job right. If there's a bunch of stuff that you recognize and think about consciously that make you notice that it's not just a regular gun, that's a failure in the design. There's a small element of the firearms community that will always hate the idea of a smart gun because they see it as inevitably leading to the loss of all manual, like all traditional dumb guns. But I think that's an oversight. I think that's short-sighted. I think it's really interesting to see this technology develop. This gives people an option for a home defense scenario where there haven't really been any very good options. I think it's really cool to see something like this in development and available, and especially with the recognition that it's not intended to replace everything. It's not going to, and no one would ever try to suggest that it is. So I will definitely be getting my hands on one of the production models. This and the one that we were shooting are just pre-production guns. Once they're out on the market, we'll be doing a whole bunch more tinkering and playing with it, and it'll be fun seeing what breaks it. Like, can I mud test this thing? Like, if I just wipe the mud off the camera screen, will it authenticate? We will find out, and we'll have a good time doing it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this sneak peek. We'll be doing a little more talking to Biofire about some of their background design process. There's a lot of cool stuff that went into this, way more than I can get into in a single video. So hopefully you'll enjoy that as well. Thanks for watching.